Okay, so my conlang is Tenata, and it's only about a year old, so it doesn't have as much of a track record as probably a lot of your languages do. It was kind of created very quickly. I created it for my senior thesis project, which I was really lucky to have a professor who a linguistics professor who understood the usefulness that conlanging can have in the study of linguistics. And so she encouraged me she said, yeah, that would be a great thesis project. So I developed it very quickly and with some specific things in mind. One thing I wanted to talk about just briefly was that there are lots of different reasons for creating a conlang and lots of different methods, and people have different priorities when it comes to their language, and they're all equally valid and important. And mine were the main thing I wanted to do was get away from the typical Indo-European kind of standard languages that we're used to. You know, we're all used to the way the Romance languages work and the Germanic languages work, and it's a pretty common, normal, people are used to that. And I wanted to try to get away from that, both in terms of structure and what the language encodes. So I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to do sex-based gender and number and the usual past, present, future tense distinctions. I wanted to do different things. When I started out thinking I was going to do noun classes, animate, inanimate, human, those sorts of categories. It ended up changing a little. I'll get into that in a minute. It ended up, actually that's where I am now, right? Yeah. Ended up being a more fluid kind of system that isn't noun classes where a specific word fits into a specific category, and this word is always human, and so it has the human ending on it, and you have to have, your adjectives have to agree with it in ending, and I didn't do that. I did something different. And I wanted to mark mood and aspect instead of tense, and just leave tense to be determined in context. And so I went through a few different sets of classifications, and then I settled on the ones I have now regarding mood and aspect based on the idea that intention and purpose in an action were important, and that was the sort of thing that you wanted to specify. So, and another thing that I wanted to do, another one of my goals, was to look at grammar from a language internal perspective. And instead of forcing it into the standard grammatical categories that we're all used to seeing. So I had already decided that I wasn't going to distinguish between nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs, and I decided instead that I would just have semantic roots that could serve any of these purposes as required. And then instead of the noun classes, like I mentioned a minute ago, I was using categorical suffixes, I was calling them, that a root can fit into based on semantic distinctions. So for example, water can be drinking water, or it can be a lake or a river or something, a naturally occurring water feature, and that's distinguished by their different suffixes that mark human, living, nature. Food is one of them, because food is a common thing. So that's one of the other things. Okay. So, now I'm going to go into some specific, okay, since I was doing some things differently, I decided that I was going to, in my thesis, describe the grammar in terms of the language itself using Tenata words that, rather than, you know, marking up a sentence saying this is the noun and this is the this and that. So these are the main parts of speech. So lume is semantic root, teia, categorical suffix, ko, the functional prefixes, ngona, verbal inflection, and ruma, the validity statement. And I'm going to describe the last three, because I've already talked about the first two a bit. So, ko are functional prefixes. This is kind of like a case system, but I didn't call it a case system for specific reasons. The predominant difference between the ko and case system is that the action in a sentence is marked by ko in the same way that any other nominal role would be. The action is just treated as another role in the sentence. So a verb is going to look exactly the same as a noun in the sentence. It's going to have a prefix on it that marks its functional role, and then the root, and then the teia categorical suffix. Ngona is the verbal inflection, which is separate. It forms a separate word. And this consists of mood and aspect. Moods are indicative, hortative, interrogative, and negative. And one of these is going to appear in every inflection word. And indicative can occasionally be omitted, but that's, anyway. And then aspect, there are three sets of aspects. The first set indicates who is benefiting from the action. The second is whether the action was intentional or incidental. And the final set is perfective, imperfective, and habitual aspects. And one member of each of these sets can be used in the inflection word. And then ruma is the last part of speech. Validity statements. They generally appear at the end of a sentence, and they indicate a person's belief about the validity of the sentence. So there are two parts, the person and the belief, and the person can be speaker, subject, or just common knowledge, or pronouns. And belief is either true, unknown, or false. So these are combined to form a word that indicates someone's, you know, whether they think what they think about the statement's validity. And the most common are speaker true or subject true. And speaker true is used in normal conversation when, you know, this is what you're saying and this is the truth. And then subject true is used extensively in storytelling, because speaker true indicates personal knowledge of something, whereas subject true, the speaker, you know, doesn't necessarily have personal knowledge of it. They're just relating something, yet they can still use the truth because it relates back to the subject of the sentence. So this is used in storytelling a lot. So those are the basic categories of speech. Now I'm going to go through a few examples. Okay, it parsed all funny. My tabs got weird there. Anyway, so tsokimi ruchamemen wachotitze slatus. The breakdown of the sentence is pretty simple. The word tsokimi, the ko so marks the actor in a sentence. Tsohi, bird, and mi is the living categorical suffix, so it indicates, you know, the bird is alive. Ruchamemen is Ru marks the recipient of the action. I'll get back to that in a sec. Bread, hame, and men is food. So, and then wachotitze, that's the ngona, verbal inflection. That's indicative for one's own benefit, intentional and habitual aspects. And then slatus is speaker true, so the bird eats bread. More complicated, it a literal translation would be the living bird intentionally, habitually has bred food for its own benefit, and I know that this is true, but the English translation is the bird eats bread. Now there's no word that translates as eat in the Tenata, and it's not explicitly, there is a word that I could use, but it's not necessary in this case because the teia suffix on bread, min, food, just indicates that the bread is food, it gets eaten. That's what food does, it gets eaten. So that's how that's where the verb comes from, because there was no specific, the word eat doesn't appear in there. And here is how, here's the difference. Okay, these are not showing up properly at all. You know what I'm going to do is, where's my mouse? Mouse, there we go. I'm gonna just do this. I don't know why these aren't working, but anyway. No. I hate PowerPoint. Okay. I'll read it. It's so masafasi ruhamelang wames dihues latus. So in this case, it's the child made bread. So in this, the important part here is ruhamelang instead of ruhamemen. And so lang is created. So the emphasis is that the bread is a created thing rather than is food. So the verb in the translation then becomes make rather than eat. So that's how those sorts of distinctions are made. And so, yeah, here's the next example. This next one is a good indication of how the difference between recipient and direct object, because it's not exactly the same thing. So menesi rukinyamen hui kalmini wachotises latus. So menesi is person in the actor form. Rukinyamen is water, drinking water that's drunk. And then huikelmimi is tree, marked with the beneficiary, and so it's what it's receiving, or it's the beneficiary of the action, whereas the water is the recipient of the action. So you can kind of parse it as the person gives water to the trees, if you're thinking of Ru as the direct object. So there's always kind of like a hidden give in there, in certain instances, which fits with the culture that I've developed that goes along with this. Okay, and okay, I don't have much time left apparently. I just saw the 3-minute thing, so I'm going to go to this one. Yes. I don't know the font, like size is, yeah, anyway, I'll read them again. Sotiu ru tikamimin men diquimin che wachotiques latus. She chopped herbs. In this case, herbs, dikami, is marked with min, which is food, but the action isn't eat. So we have tiquimin. Quimin is knife, ti is the action prefix. So, whereas in the previous sentences the action was just sort of implied and indicated by other things, in this case we have to mark an action specifically. So that's one of the differences between, anyway, in this case, ru is really the direct object, rather than marking like the action and the object at the same time. And then there are other functional prefixes that mark location, direction, purpose, instrument, and they all just work pretty much the same way. I think I have a location and a direction example in here. This one has lo nginilang is in the garden, and then so it's an action. It's pretty much the same structure. And then here we have ka tipalu, which is it's supposed to be ka. That's a typo with the e in there, which is upward. And the difference between direction and location. A direction always indicates motion and indicates that the action didn't start there, it finishes there. Whereas a location, the action begins and finishes there, it's static, it's fixed. And both location and direction also are used for time. So 6 o'clock, something happened at 6 o'clock, that would be marked with the location prefix. Whereas until whenever or since sometime, that would be marked with direction because it implies movement. There's movement there. And that's pretty much all I have, I think. I know it was sort of, it was a very rough overview. I have a lot more stuff. I didn't get to put an example of my writing system in here because that's actually one of my favorite parts of this language, but it's not in here. Anyway, because it involves scanning and all sorts of complicated things. But yeah, so anyway, that's a brief introduction to Tenata, and I hope it was mildly interesting. And that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Does anyone have questions? Where's the mic? It's sick.
It's batteryless.
Is that why it sounds like it's having an ultrasound?
Does this work?
Yes. How's that working? How's that working now?
This one isn't.
Oh, okay.
Only one of them can work at a time. They've agreed on that secretly.
Complementary distribution. Yeah, unfortunately they are.
Yes, they're.
Okay.
It's really on.
I have never been more surprised by my own voice than I did. Okay, I'm going to try and speak with the mic here, and I'm going to try to speak like this. Everybody can hear? You want it closer? How about this? Ooh. All right. I have one comment and 3 questions. Okay. First of all, it appears if you back away from your initial categorical terms or grammatical terms you came up with, you could almost separate all of the items in Tenata into essentially content and function.
Yes.
That comes so close to this idea I once had for this one language that I never posted anything about anywhere. That's cool. All right. Okay, now on to my 3 questions. Okay, first of all, I was trying to just glean from the examples. How many noun classes do you have, and what are they?
The noun classes they're sort of a semi-open class. What I've sort of decided is that, for example, the word for word, shan, can also be used as a categorical suffix. And so it's sort of a semi-open class. New ones can be added. I think off the top of my head, I can think of about 7 or 8, maybe. I've got human, living, food, created, natural, things like lakes, rivers, rocks.
But that's different from tree. 'Cause I thought I saw a tree marked.
Yeah, tree is marked with living as well.
Oh yeah, I guess it's not alive in the same tree. So, okay.
Right. Tools, art. I have one that marks an event. So talking about this conference, you probably mark it with the event suffix. What else? I know I had others in that list of mine.
Animals, or are they living?
And that would just be living. So there's kind of a human, non-human, non-living distinction.
Oh yeah, do you have a dead one? For something that was living?
I have a reversal suffix that you can put on to pretty much anything. It goes, I forgot to mention that, but it goes anywhere. So you can, for example, in Waitipue, which up here, if you put the reversal suffix at the end of, after T, then you would get not intentional, which accidental, which would be different than incidental. So there's a slight distinction there. So
Very cool.
have that.
It's the opposite of a tool art. That would be awesome.
I don't know.
Next to art and tool are the same thing.
Ooh. Okay, that was the first question. Here's a follow-up question. All right, so Sophie means bird.
Mm-hmm.
Sophie men, KFC.
Sure. Vegetarian myself, but okay. Yeah, no, that's how it works. So, you know, if a human has treated you really badly and you think they're acting like an animal, you could refer to them using the living suffix instead of the human suffix, and that would be pretty insulting, but that's how you would insult someone in Tenata.
Or the opposite of a human.
Yeah. I'm gonna eat you.
Oh, all right, very cool. All right, the last one. So I was looking at the aspectual markers and also the tree.
See if the other one works now.
Exclusive distribution.
Okay. Oh, no worries. I'm back. All right. All right. So, and then the other ones I was looking at were the, how do you call them in Keshpai? Validation markers. What are they called here?
Validity.
Truth value.
Yeah, validity.
Okay. All right. So how would you do something like, not translate it, but how would you render something like they do with what I call football announcers speak, where they say something like, if he doesn't make that block right there, that guy doesn't intercept the ball and run it back into the end zone, and they don't take the lead.
Gosh, putting me on the spot here, are you?
Okay, no. Well, here's the real question. How would you do like anything that was counterfactual or hypothetical?
Hypothetical. You could use unknown.
Oh, okay. Cool.
You could, I specifically did a 3-part distinction there instead of just having true or false. Personally, because I tend to say that if someone asks me, hey, are you hungry? I go, well, maybe. and I could eat, but I didn't, I'm not particularly hungry, but if you give me food, sure, I'll eat it. But if you answer maybe to a question in English, a lot of people say, well, is it yes or no? I said, it's neither, it's maybe. And so I wanted to be able to make that distinction, to be able to leave something as a maybe without any need for it to go one way or the other. It can just be there in a maybe state. So that's what the unknown often does.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, that would do it.
Yep.
All right.
Any other questions?
Hello. Hi, Don Boozer. You had had mentioned that the semantic roots, the lume, can function as nouns, verbs, adjectives, adjectives.
Yeah.
Can you use things like Sophie as a verb and Kulin as a noun in that, for that sense of the bird and the fly? Can you use?
Well, for fly, if you wanted to use that as a noun, it'd kind of be like the flying went well. It'd kind of be like when we add ing and turn a verb into a noun that way. It would be
like a Jared.
Yeah, it would be similar to that.
Okay.
Would that be function equivalent to, say, flight?
Oh, yeah, flight. Yeah, also flight would be. So, I mean, some words don't really semantically work in any category. Others do. It just depends on the semantics of what you're trying to put across. But a Tenata speaker wouldn't distinguish between a noun or a verb. It's just kind of an idea. It's just the semantic concept that can just be applied in different ways. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
How do you specify plural? You gotta wait for the mic. Or you can proactively do it.
Hello, my name is George Baker. How do you make the plurals? I didn't see many examples.
Well, Tenata doesn't make number distinction. There are numbers, and you can specify by just putting a number word, saying 3 or 12 or whatever. Those would actually be, I didn't get into compounding, but Tenata actually does have extensive compounding. So you would probably put the lume that means 3 in with the, you'd say 3 birds, but there's no morphological plural form.
Thank you.
How would your validity statements affect sentences like, the cat is on the map, but I don't believe it?
You can have more than one in a sentence. So, for example, you could you could suffix the morpheme that means true or false or something onto a specific word that you're, say you have a general statement that you want to say, is true, but you're questioning one part of it, you could stick false on that bit. You could, let me try to think of an example.